Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're talking about a second round for the Minnesota Vikings in the postseason. I'm as shocked as you are. Minnesota Vikings came away with a 26-20 victory over the New Orleans Saints in the Superdome, shocking the world to a degree. I didn't see any analysts pick the Vikings, well, experts, whatever you want to call them, the guys on TV. I didn't see anyone taking the Vikings. The Vikings ended up coming out with the victory. So we've got a whole week of talking about the excitement of this past matchup. Then, of course, moving forward, we'll break down the 49ers matchup on Saturday. So let's just get right into it here. And I'll give you your recap that you don't need real quick. You may want to relive it, I suppose, given that this was another extremely fun matchup between the Vikings and Saints. First quarter started off not awesome. You got a fumble on the opening drive by Adam Thielen. I think a lot of Vikings fans at that point were ready to kind of mail this one in.
Yeah.
But then the defense held strong. Will Lutz does get a 29-yard field goal. Dan Bailey matches him later in the first quarter. After that, it's kind of swung back into the Saints' direction. Alvin Kamara capped off a drive to give the Saints a 10-3 lead. Bailey.
That was the Taysom Hill drive.
Right.
He had the carry for 13 or something yards and the throw for 50 yards. And that kind of – he was almost better than Drew Brees today or yesterday.
Right. Dan Bailey hits another field goal. Then the big interception by Anthony Harris, which may have turned the tide of the entire game. I'm sure we'll dive deeper into that in a few moments here. Dalvin Cook finishes that run, that drive after a great pass to Thielen with a 5-yard touchdown. The Vikings go into half, leading 13-10. All of us are feeling pretty good, but at the same time, I imagine many of you felt the same way as I. When when's everything going to fall to pieces? When are the Vikings going to blow this one? They didn't. Ultimately, Dalvin Cook gets another touchdown on a kind of a questionable call review situation there in the third quarter. So the Vikings have a 2-score lead. Taysom Hill, again, this time on the receiving end of a Drew Brees touchdown pass. Will Lutz hits a 49-yarder as time expires, and we go to overtime. Vikings win the toss. Was it Everson Griffin that called heads, I believe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Kirk Cousins leads the Vikings down the field with a unbelievable pass and unbelievable catch to Adam Thielen, and finishes off with a fade to Kyle Rudolph in the left corner of the end zone, and that's all she wrote. So, overall, breaking it down in about 2 minutes there, just saying exactly what happened. It may not sound as nerve-wracking or as thrilling as it was, but this was par for the course for the Vikings and Saints the last few times they've met in the postseason, and ultimately, it came down to Kirk Cousins making the big play that no one thought that he could make.
Yeah, obviously that's the big takeaway from our perspective, from the Vikings fan perspective, is Kirk Cousins did the thing. He made the big throw under pressure, and to that point, he wasn't having like a spectacular game. It wasn't a bad game per se. I noticed that a lot of the post-game interviews, like with Vikings players, were saying that the Saints basically played defense to not give up the big play to Diggs, and so it seemed like there was a lot of frustration about there's no deep shots, no aggressiveness down the field, but it seemed like they were calling the play, just that the Saints were on top of it, and so he was forced to look elsewhere. That's kind of where Thielen came into the equation quite a bit with some of those underneath routes. Kind of those 10 to 15 yard intermediate throws as well. And Kirk was excelled on those for sure, was very accurate throughout the game. And especially when he got time, which the offensive line protected really well. And he was able to make the throw. And obviously the big one to Thielen in overtime to set up the touchdown was the best throw of his career without a doubt. It was an absolutely perfect throw. Dropped it right in the bucket. Good catch by Thielen too to kind of track that Willie May style. And then obviously the throw to Rudolph there, maybe OPI, maybe not. Probably was. We're not going to get into that too much. But at the end of the day, when you're putting a 5'10 DB on 6'6 Kyle Rudolph in single coverage, you're probably setting yourself up to be exposed there, and the Vikings are able to do that. So, I don't think this completely eliminates any narrative. At least it won't for the haters. But it does speak to the fact that Kirk can and does have the ability and the mental state and the clutch gene, if you will, in him somewhere, and he threw it out there for everybody to see on national TV in a big spot. So that's huge moving forward for the franchise, but obviously for this season in particular, you got to get that win. And now they have another tough test coming up this week.
Yeah, so Kirk Cousins played. It's funny because you look at the stat sheet after the game, and it honestly makes him look like he had a bigger game than he actually did, in my opinion. Because I'm right there with you. I didn't think, like, up until that drive he was just fine. He was getting the job done, and he was completing passes with regularity, but he was not by no means throwing the ball over the field to wherever he wanted, and giving the Vikings an offensive attack that was comparable to some of his best games in the season. It wasn't like that for most of this game for Cousins. It's just when it mattered the most, he came up with two tremendous throws. But for the most part, this game was him completing, like he said, those intermediate passes just to kind of keep things moving. His percentage on third down, by the way, they threw up the graphic right after the game. I can't remember what it was, but he was outstanding, and especially in comparison to the Saints, who really struggled on third down. So when Kirk Cousins was dropping back to pass on third down, he was basically perspiring confidence. He was completing all these passes. He made the big one to Diggs that kind of gets overlooked in overtime. The Vikings were
the third down one.
Yeah, they were 3rd and 1 in that situation. Kevin Stefanski ultimately called for Cousins to drop back and throw it. I think a lot of Vikings fans were expecting Dalvin Cook to get the ball there and probably would have felt more comfortable with him there. But you get the ball in Diggs' hand, that's a big completion that keeps the drive alive, and then you see the Adam Thielen throw downfield, which is going to get rightfully is going to get the headlines, and like you said, probably the biggest throw he's ever made in his career. So as a whole, first quarter through fourth quarter, he was fine. He was sufficient. He was a very solid quarterback. He did not turn the ball over, which was huge, and he was hitting those short routes, but there was no big play basically until the end of the game. So
there was the one where he got hit off the free someone on the Saints. I think it was Mario Davis actually
55,
had a free run on the blitz, and Thielen got past Lattimore, who, by the way, Lattimore was exposed throughout this game. I think he was hot on the sideline. I think it was Luke Braun who tweeted the stat just now that in 5 targets, Lattimore gave up 5 receptions for 77 yards and 5 first downs. So he was not living up to his status, so to speak, as a top-flight corner in the NFL. Xavier Rhodes definitely outplayed him if we're going to do cornerback matchups. But like you said, Kirk was hitting the throws that he usually hits. When he was under pressure, there's a couple times where the pocket collapsed and he was kind of a statue. That's kind of what we're used to. But when he had time to throw and he was able to kind of go through his reads, he was dissecting the Saints as we would expect him to. So it was a lot better than I expected. I was kind of going in with the belief that he might under the bright lights, under the national TV exposure, under the big game pressure, might melt down a little bit. And it looked like that for probably a quarter and a half, just because of the fumble and the way things started out there.
Right.
But the Vikings offense picked it up. Dalvin had a slew of kind of what they'd call explosive runs in this game, like 10-plus yard runs,
and that's
which was really nice as well. And Madison, I think, had a couple too. So
that's really kind of why I felt it was I felt this was more of like a Dalvin game as opposed to a Kirk game up until that final drive.
Yeah,
because Cook was basically the catalyst on all of the scoring drives for the Vikings. Just being able to get run downhill on first or second down and get you 5, 6, 7. He did have a couple of them that were over 10 as well. He put the Vikings in a great position throughout the game. I was uncomfortable with the 2 runs in the red zone. That was certainly disappointing to see him get stonewalled there. Because generally I've gotten used to when Dalvin Cook gets the ball from basically inside the 3 that it's going to find its way into the end zone somehow. So that was certainly disappointing, and I think we'd be talking about that quite a lot more if the ensuing pass to Rudolph wasn't complete for a touchdown. But overall, you have to be very, very happy with Kirk Cousins, and you should be happy for him too, because this is a moment that this is the first thing that came into my mind is this is a moment that this guy deserves more than anyone, period. Like, he gets so much criticism, and he acts like he doesn't hear it. He says it doesn't bother him, but as just a human being, if you have so many people criticizing you, you can't tell me it doesn't affect you a little bit. It has to bother you. Mike Zimmer even said with Deion Sanders that it bothers him.
Yeah.
If Mike Zimmer is bothered by the outside world, I promise you Kirk Cousins is too. So this is the ultimate shut everybody up moment in the ultimate game against the perfect team in a situation where you're expected to lose. And not just that, you're not just expected to lose. Most of these guys are saying you're going to lose by 17 to 20. I was one of them. I was there. Like, this was the perfect moment. This is the apex of a career for a guy who has been considered nothing but average throughout his entire professional career. And maybe, it starts with being a 4th-round pick, and he has this huge moment in a game where, the Vikings, again, we weren't expected to be in this position in the first place, but they certainly were not expected to win this football game. No one gave him a chance, myself included, Drew included.
Oh, I didn't.
Many of you guys listening too.
I think a lot of people, even if they were kind of on the fence, then you saw Hughes and Alexander go down for
exactly. That's where
I
was.
That was kind of the dagger, so to speak. Like, all right, well, if the Vikings are already weak in the secondary, now you got two probably. I mean, you could argue that they were the best performing corners during the season. They go down.
Fair argument.
And then you're faced with the most prolific pass catcher of all time, Michael Thomas. You're supposed to defend him without two potentially of your best corners.
On top of the most prolific passer of all time and one of the best in term offensive mind in terms of vertical attacking schemes ever. That threesome against Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes coming into this isn't even about – that part's not even about Kirk Cousins. But did you really – I just didn't see any of this – I didn't see him being in this position, period. But the fact that he was able to come through – I mean, that's a 76-yard drive.
Yeah.
In overtime, a must-win, sudden death situation. Everyone is watching, and if you weren't watching to start the game, you're now watching the game at the end of it because it's become, a moment in sports this weekend. And Kirk excelled. The only failure.
How much of that game in the fourth quarter felt like, how are the Vikings going to lose this game?
Exactly. Yes.
They give up the touchdown to Taysom Hill, and then when it came to trying to hold the Saints to, a field goal or even less. In that last drive there, so the Vikings forced that fumble, which was huge. I think with like 4 minutes left from Breeze. And the Vikings they punted it back, and it became, that super conservative soft defense where the Saints kind of had any underneath path they wanted. It got it down to field goal range. Lutz made the field goal, and from there it just felt like the Vikings had no momentum at all, and the Saints were going to find a way to win that game. And then that's a statement touchdown drive right there with the statement throw from Kirk to Thielen. And that was kind of the one time in the game, really, that the Saints, allowed that deep shot to happen. Because I think on that play, if you look at it, both Thielen and Diggs are running kind of like that deep kind of in cut to out deep route. And the safety was shadowed just Diggs a little bit, which should be the instinct given the way he's kind of used in his deep playmaking ability all season. So they shadowed over there, and Kirk noticed that and threw it to Thielen, and Thielen had to step on Robinson. And so that drive to me is a huge statement drive in terms of like now as a fan, I'm not, if the team does wilt away 10 points in the fourth quarter, and it goes to overtime, like I have a different attitude towards the overtime period now.
Because you've seen it now.
I've seen it now.
Everything that we thought, I'm going to phrase this very carefully. Everything that we thought that Cousins had the potential to do, he did against the Saints. Mm-hmm. Everything that his talent, like his arm talent, his physical stature and ability, his cerebral part of the game, all the things that we can combine together and say this is a pretty good quarterback, all showed up in the right moment for the first time in his entire career.
Yeah. Yeah, and we should note, too, that Dalvin was pretty much stuffed the entire second half. Yeah. I think he had like 85 yards on 15 carries in the first half, like pretty efficient running the ball. Right. A lot of those explosive plays were in that first half, and then he was essentially shut down in the second half. And so really a lot of the offense, if not all of it, that was put together in the second half. Besides, I think there was one really good carry by Dalvin overtime for like 12 yards for a first down. But besides that, a lot of the offense, a lot of the big third down conversions were all Kirk making throws. And we're not even talking about the defense yet, because Mike Zimmer had maybe his best game as well in terms of the coaching, the game plan. And then because one thing I really want to bring up is the use of Hunter and Griffin inside against the Saints offensive line. And that really flustered them quite a bit. And it allowed the Vikings to attack the weak spot of that pass protection unit, and Drew Brees was flustered the entire game too. So between Kirk playing, a very good game given the circumstances, given the noise, and then also Zimmer having a phenomenal game, which we talked about this on the pregame show. Like Zimmer's had Peyton's number, Breeze's number in
Right.
the past. So we kind of knew that, but this was a new wrinkle that he had to come up with this week, and the Vikings executed it flawlessly, and it produced the results that they were expecting.
And this is all things considered. You think about the fact that BC Johnson also had a major drop in this game that would have resulted in a first down and would have extended a drive.
Thielen had a big drop too, actually.
Thielen did as well, and then the
deep crosser over the middle, which was that was one of those play action shots that was kind of in the fourth quarter that I think they were going for kind of the dagger, and Thielen was 25, 30 yards downfield, but he dropped the pass. There was more opportunities to be had there. If you want to count the Hollins one in that folder as well, you can.
Well, that was a big moment play. Had he caught that ball, I mean, he had two hands on it. So I think it's fair to say that
it wasn't a perfect throw, but it was catchable for sure.
If you went up to Alexander Hollins after that game and said, "Hey, do you think you should have caught that ball?" he would have said yes, because it hit him square in the hands.
Also funny that was the only snap he was on the field for, and he gets targeted on one of the most important plays of the game.
Right. I mean, this game looks completely different if he hits that. So again, I guess you can put a lot of these things into perspective too. Cousins did overcome quite a few things in this game too. You mentioned the fact that Dalvin Cook wasn't too efficient in the second half. We mentioned the drops already, and then just the noise. You see how many times throughout that game, and this is kudos to Saints fans. I mean, Kirk Cousins never walked on the field without his hands over his helmet, because you couldn't hear anything in that stadium.
But that should be expected. We know the Superdome. And,
it's expected, I guess, but at the same time, you can't prepare for that. And this is a situation with Cousins, a guy that historically has just been a problem when pressure is bothering him, and other.
I think his high pitched cadence. It's probably doing him some favors, because it's unique, and
I always think his voice is cracking.
Crystal clear. We could hear it crystal clear on the broadcast.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times you watch the Falcons in there or any other team, or Jared Goff, I don't know, somebody else in a big playoff game, big divisional game, you don't hear the quarterback as clearly. But if you got a high pitched cadence like Kirk, maybe that's the advantage.
Maybe it is. All right, let's talk about the defense then. You gave us a little prequel to this. So, obviously, the defensive line was a lot of fun yesterday. I think that there will be plenty of time spent talking about that little variation that Mike Zimmer decided to throw at Sean Payton in the way that he used Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter. But you got to give big props to guys like Andrew Sendejo, who stepped up big in a nickel role, where even us on the pregame show, we thought it was going to be Jaron Kearse, and I don't know about you guys, but when I saw Sendejo lined up in the slot there, I was not thrilled about it. So he comes up with a big game defensively. Anthony Harris, as I mentioned previously, may have turned the tides of the entire game with that interception right before halftime that led to a Dalvin Cook touchdown. He continues a phenomenal year and puts more money into his pocket this offseason. But maybe the biggest surprise was the way that Xavier Rhodes handled Michael Thomas for the most part.
Where the team handled Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
70 yards for Michael Thomas is far and away better than I expected.
But you take away that one moment for Xavier Rhodes, and he was pretty phenomenal throughout that game. The one deep pass that he allowed.
The Deontay Harris play.
Right. And that was, a bit of a creative play call. It's still baffling how quickly he was able to spin around Xavier Rhodes on that play, and he just completely lost himself. If you saw the dot replay on the field, did you see this thing on Twitter? Where they show the position numbers, and then they show where they're going on the field as it goes. And Rhodes is it's trailing him perfectly for 15 yards, and then he just spins out completely left of the screen and has to come back all the way over. And then he starts yelling at Harrison Smith. But that's all beside the point. Yeah. My point being here is that Xavier Rhodes stepped up in a pretty big way, and the defense as a whole, behind that pass rush, was as good as we've seen it all year. Yeah,
I think what really won this game, I guess defensively for the Vikings, was that wrinkle where going into the game, I think we talked about this quite a bit on the preview show, was the tackles for the Saints,
right,
between Armstead and Ramczyk. Two Pro Bowl caliber guys at the least, right? Two studs. And that matchup we talked about, Griffin and Hunter, we thought they'd get home, but we kind of thought that was the matchup to watch, when what happened was the Vikings would put Griffin and Hunter inside against their weaker players. Andrews Pete inside there specifically was one of them before I think he actually did get hurt in that game.
Yep.
But they attacked the weaker part of that pass protection unit with their best players, and they also the guys talked a lot about in the post game about how Breeze likes to kind of step up or stay there, kind of higher up in the pocket, and move and step up, vertically down the field with this when stepping up in the pocket, and he wasn't able to do that with Hunter and Griffin right in front of him. So that created a lot of sacks, that created hurried throws, that created the fumble with 4 minutes left in the game, and created probably the interception to a degree as well that he threw to Anthony Harris. So
For sure.
Breeze was never comfortable in this game. I mean, he completed 26 of 33 passes, but so many of those, if not really all of them, were kind of under 10 or under 5 air yards. A lot of that check down underneath stuff. The passing game was never a threat. The Saints' passing game was never a threat. Their biggest threat really was Taysom Hill doing really weird things, which I remember on the show I just made the point like he's super average at everything, and I think he is, but he
still is based off of his performance. It's just that he's able to do a lot of things.
He does literally every single football skill at an average level, which is super unique. But
the throw, by the way,
it wasn't a good throw.
It was not a good throw. Thank you. It was a terrible throw. It was awful.
Just smoked Rhodes so bad that it could float in the air for an extra 10
seconds. He
did
a fair catch. Like it was like he stood up there and just caught it like that. That was not a that is a testament to his flexibility, not his talent. Let's just get that straight. Taysom Hill is a very flexible player, but as far as overall talent, like he's fine.
He is. That's what it is. I hate like the fact that he was the most dangerous player on the field for the Saints. Like Michael Thomas was very quiet, all things considered, relative to his season. Jared Cook was a much smaller threat than I thought. I mean, he was not much of a threat compared to what he had been the past few games against other opponents. Alvin Kamara had his typical 3 yards a catch average. Taysom Hill was the guy to worry about, I guess, and. If he was on the field more, we might have a different result. But the Vikings, they held Drew Brees in check, and that's probably, not emphasizing it enough. He was really shut down due to that pass rush, due to guys like Rhodes stepping up, playing pretty well outside of that big completion. Hill in the slot, Kendricks and Barr flying all over the place, keeping Kamara at bay. That defensive performance was. Impeccable by Mike Zimmer. Maybe his best performance in terms of the coaching, game planning, really since I want to say that Packers game, 2015 to win the NFC North.
That's bold, but I mean it's hard to deny that given the moment and the way that this offense played all of December. I mean, we mentioned in the pregame show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking like big games, like playoff implications on the line. Like obviously in 2017, he had a bunch of those.
Right.
The Rams game in mind, but like. In terms of win or go home type games, there has been some questions about Mike Zimmer and how that defense plays. Like 2016, their playoff hopes ended and they gave up 40 points to the Packers and then 35 to the Colts. Like 2017, obviously the Eagles game. So there was some questions there, and he came through huge in this one. Against Sean Payton, who is perceived to be one of the best, if not the best, offensive minds in football.
Absolutely. So you can just look at the target spread here, and you can see kind of how impressive. Like just looking at these numbers can tell you what type of game this team had in coverage. Michael Thomas only got 8 targets. I believe he was averaging like 12 or 13 this season per game. Yeah. So he wasn't even open for a lot of the time, and that's a testament to just the secondary as a whole. Rhodes was the one that will get the numbers for it, the kind of like the recognition, I suppose. But it was largely a team effort. It was just, I think, what was it that Rhodes got 3 of the targets?
3 targets, 2 catches, 20 yards.
Okay.
So the one incompletion that was to Michael Thomas was because Rhodes broke it up.
Yeah.
That was on a 3rd down, I believe. That was kind of in a crucial spot there in the second half, and Rhodes made that play. So. We've ragged on Rhodes quite a bit. I think
everyone
the
has.
Fan base in general has. A lot of people have because he's kind of fallen from that all-pro status to, a guy that gets targeted quite a bit on purpose by other teams. And to his credit, he stepped up in a big way and held the most prolific receiver to 70 yards in a really big spot. So I guess it wasn't all him, but when he was the guy covering Michael Thomas, it didn't seem like Breeze was comfortable throwing that way, and a large reason for that is Xavier Rhodes.
Absolutely. So you get this excellent coverage in the back end. Rhodes, Sadeo, who we've mentioned a couple of times. You get this solid pass rush up the middle, and you got linebackers that are moving sideline to sideline. at as well as anyone in the NFL, and you've got a recipe for success. I mean, it sounds so simple in theory, and why couldn't the Vikings do this more this season to give us a little bit more confidence heading into this matchup? That would have been nice, but ultimately, I mean, this comes down to the Vikings being very well prepared for this matchup too. Like, Harrison Smith was jumping on so many things throughout this game. Just his instincts were out the roof. Whether it was coming up and making a tackle,
yep,
or being in the right position to take away a throw. Period. Sometimes it's not even about the incompletion. It's just about the fact that they don't even dare throw the ball there because he's not the coverage is too good, or you're afraid of a guy like Harrison Smith turning it around on you. I mean, Breeze is a guy that has precision accuracy. He's very smart with where he's delivering the football, and straight up, a lot of the options just weren't there. And the guys that they thought they were going to have access to throughout the game were covered up by guys playing better than they really have in their entire career.
Yeah.
I mean, can you think of a moment where Sendejo was better in his entire career as a Viking?
I mean, the one instance that comes to mind really is the other Saints playoff game from a couple years ago. That's the one that comes to mind because that's before Anthony Harris was kind of a regular starter and Sendejo was the other guy. But
he was consistently excellent throughout this entire game at a position that he had never started at in his career. I mean, that's as a known Sendejo hater, I tipped your cap to that type of moment because he just shuts you up. I mean, when he came back to the Vikings, I didn't want him. I was pissed. I thought I had the same reaction as all of you guys, thinking that he was going to come hurt one of our players now. And
that isn't out of the realm of possibilities yet.
Right. That's fair, yeah. And when I saw him line up over, the head of a slot receiver, I was like, oh, this is just a very questionable Mike Zimmer decision. And he does have him every once in a while. So,
I'm sure there, I haven't watched all 22 or anything, but I'm sure there's more that goes into it. I'm sure you had Kendricks shading towards Sendejo a little bit. You had, I'm sure he had help along the way there, but really the flaws defensively in this game, the Taysom Hill touchdown where Smith was kind of on an island between Kamara and Taysom Hill there on that sideline. You had really the garbage time kind of soft defense that is sort of a pet peeve for me, where they're not aggressive and they worry way too much about getting beat deep. That I don't like that, but I mean, all in all, like in terms of like this defense performance and the way the Vikings have contained Breeze, contained Sean Payton the past few times, I kind of expected something like this in terms of the total output for the Saints offense. My thing was I didn't think the Vikings would be able to keep I was worried about the Vikings offense, and they came through and it mattered. And so to me, that's the difference in the game. Was the Vikings offense was Kirk Cousins making the key throws, Dalvin Cook putting up enough explosive runs early on in the game, and then the Vikings are overcoming that early turnover and a lot of maybe in the past the fumble by Thielen would have doomed them. In 2018, it did doom them. We literally saw that happen. We saw a Thielen fumble return deep in Vikings territory doom the team, and this year they were able to overcome it.
I hope you guys saw the most ridiculous stat ever, by the way.
The fumble thing?
Yeah. The last three teams to fumble on their opening possession ultimately won the Super Bowl. Most recently, the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles. So, Vikings are they're on their way to the Super Bowl here. That stat matters a lot. All right, so let's talk about how the perspective on the Vikings has changed as a result of this game. Obviously, the most important key factor here, they're still playing in the game next week, so that does help the skull scale a little bit. Last week, both of us were a little bit low on this team. I believe I dropped mine down all the way to 6.5, and I think you were at 6 or something in that matter, because neither of us really saw a Super Bowl as being possible for this Vikings team. Given the circumstances and given the overall talent on the roster and given the way that they had performed this year. So, coming off of, one of the biggest wins in recent Vikings history, at least within the last decade or so, a huge upset victory, a game that you would have won quite a bit of money had you bet the Vikings money line, which we didn't do because we didn't have the foresight.
We discussed that on the preview show, too. It was 8.5 spread, and it was, $350 or $345 or something on the money line?
Just to put $10, yeah, or $100, whatever you want. Anyways, I assume your perspective has changed. My perspective has certainly changed. Then we'll check in with anyone that had responded on Twitter. So, what is your skull scale standing at following this victory?
Yeah, this is a big jump. I'm going 2 full points to 8 here, and that's largely so. Part of this is just because of how I feel about the 49ers. Part of it is, the Vikings showing up in a playoff game that I didn't expect them to, winning in a hostile environment. 2-point jump is significant, I think. And I did not. Going into this week, I didn't think one playoff win is possible, and now obviously this is going to happen when you get the surprise upset and you start getting nostalgic about your team and you start investing more emotions in your team, which we all got punished for a couple years ago, and
probably will again pretty soon.
Probably, but the San Francisco's defense is obviously very scary, but I'm not scared of Jimmy G at all, and the Vikings have in recent memory have shut him down quite a bit. I mean, season opener of 2018, same coach, same quarterback. They didn't do a whole lot of damage, and it seems like this defense has been playing very, very well lately. The Vikings defense. This goes back into the regular season. You had the turnovers against the Chargers. You had, the Packers didn't do anything special against them. You can go back quite a bit there, really to, I guess, the Seattle game. Ever since then, the Vikings defense has been, a really, really good unit and tough to score on. So if the Vikings offense can put up another performance similar to that, where they're efficient passing the ball, they convert on third down. Dalvin is, creating explosive plays at a high rate. They can win this game, and I didn't say that about last week. So I'm going to go with an 8 here, and it's wild that we're even discussing this game, considering how kind of the Vikings limped into the playoffs. But the fact that really the big mover here is just that Kirk Cousins made the key throws, showed up in a big game, and now I believe the offense can do enough to beat the number one team in the NFC.
So the skull scale is all about perspective in terms of the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. So I'm definitely more confident that the Vikings can win the Super Bowl now because they're still playing, which is an important factor, and that just inherently is going to raise the skull scale. The second factor for me that's really important is just the fact that they weren't supposed to be playing at all. Period. Like that game was supposed to be a blowout. Everyone said it was going to be. I mean, it wasn't just the national people either. It was the local media. It was everyone. It was us. It was probably most of you guys listening to this. We all thought the season was going to be over. And so that's just, that part in itself is going to raise the skull scale for me. So I'm going to jump up to an 8 as well. I'm not going to go too much higher for a couple of reasons. One being, like you said, the 49ers this week. This is the number one seed in the NFC for a reason. They're a really good football team, and the Vikings have to play them on the road. So they're obviously not going to be favored in this game either. Do you think about the fact then that if they were to win this game, the most likely opponent that they'll see is Green Bay? I guess it's not necessarily most likely, but
the other teams are 0. I mean, the Vikings are 0-3 against the other teams this year. So.
Right. So Seattle and Green Bay being the two teams remaining, whether it's Lambeau Field or CenturyLink Field in Seattle, it's not exactly a hospitable place to play for the Vikings. So that's the situation that they're facing heading into this matchup here and heading into the rest of the postseason, which I'm sorry, I'm still not super optimistic that the Vikings can truly make a run out of this. I'm thrilled about the victory. I think that this team played as well as they really can. I'm thrilled for Kirk Cousins and the way that he performed and shutting everyone up to a degree. But when you have to go to Levi Stadium in San Francisco following this victory, and I know that they've already made an effort.
On a short week too.
Right,
it's a short week. That's you're getting screwed over a little bit there too.
So I want to mention this too, the fact that the last time they had an emotional victory, and I know that they already mentioned that they went over this in the locker room, but the last time they had an emotional victory, the following week was not good, and that was the 2017 NFC Championship, of course. So I know that they're already preparing for that, and I saw Harrison Smith took a leadership role in making sure that everyone was kind of toning it down a little bit on this overall celebration of this game. It's just, I think that we're, as Vikings fans, and maybe this is just because I've been a Vikings fan for as long as I can remember, I'm ready for that fall. I'm seeing it.
I'm ready for the fall. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just.
I am too. I mean, we're emotionally prepared for it. I think
we're setting. I think that the Vikings are setting us up like really nicely here. Like they're finessing it a little bit. Where you get the nice victory over New Orleans, and now I can't remember who tweeted this, but it was someone from The Athletic tweeted someone in the comment section of their article saying the comment read, I thought the Vikings were going to lose for sure last week. Now I 100% think they're going to beat San Francisco. I'm doing this to myself. That's exactly how I feel. Because there was no shot that I thought the Vikings were going to win last week, and now this week I could talk myself into it, and maybe I will by the time we get to Thursday's show here. But right now I just can't be confident that they get past San Francisco. I'm just happy about what that win says for this team, what it says for the coach, and just overall the way that they played. They are where they were supposed to be now, right?
Yeah.
They're in the divisional. They're in the divisional round of the playoffs, and now if they can get to the NFC Championship, that will, in the minds of many Vikings fans who have complained about Kirk Cousins, getting to the NFC Championship will make the contract worth it, essentially.
Yeah.
So he's one game away from that.
That's kind of what it boils down to for.
You get you get a new quarterback coming off of an NFC Championship game appearance. You tend to think, okay, he's got to
go
get us back
there at the least, right? That's kind of the bar, and it hasn't been met. And obviously, there's other reasons that go into that. It's not just the quarterback. There's, the defense is certainly not what it was in 2017. But I'm with you in that it kind of feels like, okay, here was the big moment of the season. The celebration moment. Right. Now it part of me as a fan. Now that I really hope the players don't feel this way, but part of me as a fan is kind of like, all right, well, I'm good now. Like that's enough for me. Whereas like the rest is kind of more than I expected.
We're playing with house money. We're playing with house money right now.
Because you set expectations, and I was thinking, okay, one playoff win coming into the season, like that's about what I would expect, right? And so after this, it's kind of like anything else would be great. Let's just hope the players aren't thinking the same thing, because then we'll get Philly 38-7 all over again. But it's certainly a big and unexpected win that I didn't think this team had in it, and that fact that they do and they showed it is why I jumped up 2 points on my skull scale.
Well, and on top of the fact that you only have to win one fewer game now. The Vikings are that much closer to the Super Bowl by winning last week against the Saints.
Yeah.
And they do have a real opportunity here against San Francisco. Now, as of this recording, am I confident in it? Not really. No. I don't think I'm perspiring too much confidence right now about this this impending matchup here with San Francisco. But the point being here is that this team really, put something together that I don't think a lot of us thought was possible given what we saw during the regular season. The defense played as well as it could. You got a complimentary performance from the offense, and Dan Bailey made his kicks. We got everything kind of just came together. The only way the Vikings were going to win this game is if everything came together as it did, and it did. And to expect a replicate performance this weekend against San Francisco might be,
I can assure you right now the offense will not be as efficient.
Right, I feel that way too.
You're going to need the defense for sure to play as well, if not better, against Jimmy G and Kyle Shanahan, which I do think is possible. I think the defense has that in them, but we'll get to that on the show when we talk about the Niners. And the Niners are weird because for the longest time this season, I just didn't buy into them.
I stand with you there. Yeah, I think we were at week 9 was when we were like, all right.
My take going into the postseason was the Saints are the scariest team in the NFC, and I just didn't think it was that close. Their offense is freaking rolling. Like, that defense is still formidable in New Orleans, and now all of a sudden they're out of it. And the 49ers seemingly, Niners fans right now are probably loving this. They get Kirk Cousins coming into town in the playoff game. The Vikings have a short week this week.
Yep. And
then they just have to beat the 6th seed, and then they're in the NFC Championship game hosting either an injured Seattle team or a really non-impressive Packers team that is squeaking by bad teams all season, and they beat at home by 30 this year. So the Niners are loving this, and I hope – obviously this I don't know. Part of me is I'm trying not to get too optimistic about it, because that's when you really get hurt with this team, with this franchise.
So let me ask you this: Are the Vikings the most talented team remaining, not named the 49ers, in the NFC playoff picture right now?
Yeah, they are. They're certainly more talented than the Seahawks right now, especially with all their injuries. Certainly more talented, I think, than the Packers, which is, I mean, if people hear or see this, they're going to crucify me for saying that because the Vikings are 0-2 against the Packers this year. But the Vikings have lost both of those games because Kirk Cousins played his two – I'm not even exaggerating this – his two worst games as a professional against the Packers this season. They just happened to both fall against Packers. And, yeah, I'm with you that in terms of talent, Niners and Vikings are the most talented rosters left in the NFC. I actually think the Cowboys are probably the most talented roster in the NFC, but they're not in the playoffs.
So I guess you can make an argument then that the Vikings are, one of the most dangerous teams remaining. And if you look just, throughout recent history of wild card teams that actually, go deep into the postseason, the Vikings do kind of have that composition. I can talk myself into the way that this roster is and kind of what they need in order to succeed and see shades of the Giants and shades of,
the Ravens,
the
Steelers back in I think they were a 6 seed in 2008. That's just if you are predicated on defense,
right,
and you have a capable quarterback, an offense that can put up points if it's absolutely necessary,
and a horse or two in the backfield.
They have the ability to, right, and then the running back bell cow that can carry the load for you.
The point that I'm saying is that there is reasonable fan dreams can be born from this performance here, and because you can see so many traits of this team in teams who have done it in the past. There is historical precedent to suggest that the Vikings, maybe they could squeak one out here in San Francisco. I mean, it's a scary thought, and I'm not ready to indulge just yet this week. I'm sure by the time we get to Thursday that I'll be a little bit more amped up about this game and feeling a little bit more confident and kind of drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit. But at this point in the week, it's just it's tough to look past this matchup and say that they really have a chance. But it's just very fun to even be in this position and still talking about a matchup for the Vikings. And just by the way, it was against the Saints too, which just makes it feel that much better, I think, for a lot of us. You look at this trilogy of games here, and it starts with obviously the game in 2009, the NFC Championship that ends with Tracy Porter, and the Bounty Gate and all the things that went into that game. You have to think about, are the Saints cursed now against the Vikings because of the way that these last two games have panned out?
It's certainly possible.
They certainly deserve it.
What many would say is that it's karma for
it is karma.
Bounty Gate. I mean, it is karma. It is.
It's perfect. So, like Drew said before, we'll go a little bit deeper into the strengths and weaknesses of the San Francisco matchup, and where the Vikings might be able to find some issues with that team, and expose some weaknesses, and the vice versa of that later on this week. As far as this game goes, outstanding performance as a whole. You finally get your money with Kirk. And I think it's just nice to have another victory Monday this week, and especially considering that very few of us were expecting it. And for those of you that were expecting it, congratulations to you. Hats off. It doesn't make you more of a fan, though.
It doesn't make you smart either.
No, it might. It's interesting.
Anyway, okay. We got two Skull Skill responses that I want to highlight here.
Let's do that.
One is just one's really short, one's pretty long. So this is from Evan T. Creed at the X-Ray Style. He says he's all about 8 right now. So I think I'm 8 on the Skull Scale, and I'm 8 like Kirk Cousins. Yep. Yeah, lit it up. Which, I mean, I'm okay talking about Kirk Cousins a little bit longer with that performance. That was the throw where he was getting hit literally as he released it. I think there's a great image, by the way, and now this is going to be bad radio because I'm trying to explain a picture. But there's a picture of as Kirk let it go. I think it was Hendrickson, that D end for the Saints, is got his finger in the air, thinking, okay, well, he got hit as he throw. This is probably floated in the air. It's going to be picked. Looking down the field, and then you can see as the video plays out, Thielen falls under the ball, and Lattimore is completely lost. But that throw, the other throw to Thielen, obviously in overtime, and then the Rudolph touchdown throw, which was a good throw, by the way. A lot of it obviously was Rudolph out-muscling the DB, but you got to put that ball in the right spot, and he did. So that's, again, like you said, you had to you have to feel good for Kirk there to finally get that. Maybe get the monkey off his back a little bit, and you could tell the team too. I mean, obviously this is from the team perspective, but you see that
Right.
video of the locker room, and you see
Right.
how happy the team is for Kirk, and clearly they like this guy, and they feel a little bit responsible, so to speak, for that record and in the prime time and the big games. And obviously it is a team game, and I personally don't like the QB wins record thing, but the team kind of felt responsible for it. And you heard Rudolph say it a bunch of times that they're really happy for Kurt for him to get this win and for that perception to maybe ease up a little bit. So I'm with Evan here that it feels like it's kind of Kirk's moment here. Love his career so far.
This
but
is his moment. This is definitely his moment.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you said earlier it's the apex of his career, but let's just hope like it's not.
The trajectory is still trending up.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about. I loved what he said, and for those of you that haven't watched it yet, check out his post-game interview, especially where he's talking about how when you're an NFL player, you're trying to reach different mountains, and every time you get to the top of it, you just see another mountain off in the distance, and you have to fight for that. And he was very level-headed about this win. It wasn't like, I'm sure he was excited and thrilled, just like any of us. I mean, he was screaming and yelling about it, but he was also thinking about the fact that, yes, he's conquered this mountain, and maybe the last one was winning, a big game in the regular season, and now he's got his first postseason win. Well, now he's thinking, all right, well, why not get a Super Bowl? He's got a forward-thinking mindset, which I don't think, we can look back on it in 2017. I'm not sure if this team had that forward-thinking mindset. So it's definitely nice to see that this team as a whole, and it starts with Kirk. I'm just very happy to see for a guy. This guy just deserves it so much. I'm sorry. Like we throw so much shade his direction because of how much money he makes. I mean, he has to answer to all of these critics, which a lot of the stories are just narratives created by people like us and people like the media.
Yeah.
It's really unfair. Like, a lot of it is very unfair criticism of a guy who has
QB
really,
wins is just not fair. It's really not.
It's not.
There's too much context involved, but you get a record. He was playing for the Washington organization for so long. Like, come on, how fair is that?
It's not. And it's just great to see a guy like him finally get that moment. And I think we won't go into this now, but this is going to be a thing that his agent talks about next time.
Oh, yeah.
When he's negotiating a contract and
right. We'll talk about the an early contract extension possibility, perhaps this offseason. But the last one I want to get to here is from @Mr. Minnesota. Now this is kind of interesting because it is part of me is this is how I feel about this team, and that like you doubt the team a little bit too much to where like you're hedging your emotions by betting on the other team, right? So he goes, I put $100 on the Saints to cover -8, and I'll put $100 down on the Niners to cover -7. So he's kind of hedging his emotions.
Doing the emotional hedge.
Well, if my team loses, I'm still going to get paid for it. But he says, I ride and die with this team, but I don't have faith they can do this all over again and pull off the big upset. For me, largely depends on the injury report. He says, 5 out of 10 for this week's game against the Niners. Prove me wrong again.
So he feels a lot like I do, kind of,
Yeah.
where it's like you're on this emotional high, and I'm ready to ride this out with you guys for as long as you want this week, by the way, because it's I feel great today knowing that the Vikings won. I'm ready to ride this out, but when we get to Saturday, I'm going to be the same guy that was sitting on his floor, leaning, like shaking back and forth, trying to keep my heart rate steady. Yeah, sweating. Exactly. I mean, I really feel you on this response, because that's exactly where I'm at. Like, I feel great, but it's just like I know that just another one of these emotionally devastating moments is on the horizon. I'm just hoping that we can push it back to next season. We can get through this entire year.
Well, that would be great. That would be great.
That's my one wish as a fan. And
yeah, obviously that's the wish for every single year, but I mean, it's like
I think
it's a weird feeling, because as a fan base, at least personally too, like I just never considered the Super Bowl this year. Like I didn't, especially going into the playoffs. Like after that Packers loss, I was like, well, okay, like this team doesn't have it in them,
Yeah.
And now suddenly they go into New Orleans to beat, by the way, the number 1 DVOA team in football. They go into New Orleans, went on the road, and right, in the toughest environment in football, perhaps. They go in and win. And suddenly now this vision is alive of a Super Bowl that I didn't think it was possible for the last few weeks.
Okay,
And
before you say any more on that topic, let me ask you this, and we'll close out the show with this question: is it fair to start talking about the Vikings' potential to win a Super Bowl now, or do we have to wait until next week?
No, I mean the responsible thing to do would be to wait till next week. But I understand from the fans' perspective that if you want to get into that, it's fine because you just beat what I thought was the most dangerous team in the NFC on the road.
A Super Bowl pick.
In theory, if you beat the Saints on the road, you absolutely can go into San Francisco and beat the Niners. So however you want to handle it is fine. I would proceed with cautious optimism, but you can do whatever you want. It's your fandom. That's fine.
You're taking the words out of my mouth. Proceed with caution. I love that. That's great. All right, guys. We appreciate the responses to the Skull Scale. We appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, you can find us on the Daily Norseman. Subscribe on Twitter if you haven't done so already. You can check the videos out on YouTube if you prefer to watch us. And as always, if you don't like listening to our show, make sure to check out what else the Climb the Pocket network has cooking. If you don't like Drew and I'm sure that there's some personality within the 5 to 10 people.
If you don't like us and you're listening at this point in the show, then there's probably something wrong.
Yeah, there's probably something wrong with us for sure. We know that, but probably something wrong with you as well for continuing to listen to something that you hate. Although there are people that do that. People with Mike Francesa out in New York do it all.
True.
So, anyways, thanks for listening, folks, and we will come back later on this week to talk to you about this matchup in more detail and break it down piece by piece. So, until then, Skull Vikings, enjoy the victory, and we'll catch you later on this week.